When was the time you smelled total bullshit and ended up being right? New manager at work was awful. The owner of the small company, Children's Entertainment, was a lovely person, hired a manager because the business was rapidly growing and he had amazing credentials. He was a horrible person to work with, mainly left senior staff alone, but would berate the younger junior staff to no end. Assign them impossible tasks, call them names, mock their intelligence. I had to step in a few times. Even as senior staff, he would patronize me. The strange thing is that he would correct me using completely wrong information, and he was constantly making mistakes and blaming junior staff. He didn't know what Excel was. I was using Excel, and he told me to stop messaging my friends. I said it was a spreadsheet. He pointed at the spreadsheet and said, "No, that's some kind of messenger program." I had to stop him from washing the radio. He tried to put the radio in the sink and pressure wash it, etc. The junior staff had enough and called a meeting with the owner. The owner investigated his resume. His MBA was a lie. No university had a record of him enrolled anywhere. All his work experience was overseas, so when she managed to track all the contacts down, they had never heard of him. I told my boss that my paychecks weren't accurate, and she said I wasn't calculating my taxes right. I told her I know that I was. I looked up my pay stubs online and found she was skimming about 4 hours of time off my check every week. My ex-wife came home around 3 a.m. every night after closing at her new job, which closed to the public at midnight. I found it odd that it took 3 hours to close up a McDonald's. The store was nice, but that's a long time. For about 3 to 4 months this went on. She always went into great detail about work the next day. This was way out of character for her. I knew something was up. One night before she left, I had to use her car for something and my work phone fell out of my pocket. I searched everywhere for it. Now I can access my location history through either my work or personal phones as they're linked, and at about 2 a.m., it hits me. I can just use the Google location history to find it. I found it all right. In her car outside of some dude's house where it had been since 12:15 a.m. Busted. A major indicator of lying is giving too many details. People telling the truth usually keep it simple. Liars tend to over-explain and say way more than they need to. Usually bites them in the ass since they now have to make sure all those details add up with the excessive detail in future stories. I'm an aspiring actor. I attended a presentation for a company that represents itself as an alternative kind of talent representative for aspiring actors. Everything felt off, especially after they have this lengthy summary of all the roles they booked for their clients, which were mostly extra work. At some point the presenter said something like, "Of course, if this doesn't sound good to you, you can leave." Out of like 30 people, I was the only person who walked out. After doing some internet research, turns out they're essentially a scam that preys on would-be actors, charging to submit them to publicly available casting calls. I was working at a restaurant, and there was this girl named Shauna I worked with. Shauna was sweet and bubbly, albeit goofy and occasionally a little snarky. But she was 16 at the time, and I remember being an asshat at that age too. Well, one day she comes in crying and says her mom, who has been arrested for drug possession in the past, was on some kind of drug binge, and she was scared she was going to another state-appointed home soon. I console her, and we go about our day until her mom comes raging in through the doors yelling and making a scene. She's high AF, and you can tell. I'm the manager at the time, and I tell her she needs to leave before I call the police. She goes out, and I think that's that, but comes back in with a trash bag full of random shit which she tosses at Shauna. She tells her not to come home. She didn't need her sucking up all her money. I could see nothing less than absolute despair in the kid's eyes. She knows there will be a phone call made and she'll end up in foster care again. So I did something stupid. I told her to come to stay with me and my husband until her mom sobers up. It was better than a foster home, I thought. She comes to stay in my spare room and she's a fantastic housemate. She cleaned up her messes, she tried to pitch in money from her paychecks, she even made us dinner one night. She was an angel. Then, very slowly, she began to let her guard down, and I started smelling bullshit a lot. She'd ignore phone calls and disappear for a night. I found a syringe wadded up in toilet paper in the bathroom trash, she denied, and even smelled cigarette smoke in the house when she was alone by herself. I could tell this girl was a lot more than she had seemed, and I needed to figure something out to move her back in with her mother. I attempted to call her, had her number from Shauna's paperwork, but the phone was off. My husband was telling me to let her stay, that foster care was nothing to sneeze at, etc. I gave her a lot of chances. But then, the night came. She was scheduled a closing shift, coming in a few hours after I did. She never showed up. I called her phone and she answered, giving me some bullshit about being sick. I smelled it. The bullshit was strong. I texted my husband and asked if he was home and possibly if Shauna was there sick or not. He says she is, and she does seem ill. Something wasn't sitting right with me. So I take a lunch break and drive home. I could hear her from the street. I didn't even walk in, I just went to the window and looked in. She, a 16-year-old girl, was having sex with my 32-year-old husband. And apparently liked it a lot. I was in shock. I called the police, told them the situation while I had a mental breakdown in my car. The police came, caught in the act, he was arrested. He's a registered sex offender for life, and she's got a daughter by him. She's turned out just like her mother. I should have tossed her out the very first time I smelled the bullshit. A bullshitter can't be trusted. When a now ex-friend claimed to the guy who just broke up with her that she was pregnant. Another friend and I told him it was bullshit. She's just trying to get you to stay with her. Sure enough, her stories, to all three of us, weren't adding up, and soon after she lost the baby. My then boyfriend's friend claimed she had brain cancer. After a year of dating, I got really suspicious. She was managing her cancer with only weed and benzos. She'd fall or have a seizure and would ask my boyfriend to come help her. I also never met her, which I thought was strange since she was my BF's best friend. One day BF calls me up and says, "Best friend just told me she doesn't actually have cancer." Least surprising thing I've ever heard. But you shouldn't really accuse someone of faking cancer. He stayed friends with her. A friend was telling me about this deal he found online. I told him it was probably a scam. He said it wasn't. A week later, he came back to me complaining about getting scammed. I was at a market in Australia looking at these cheap counterfeit hats with American sports teams on them. As I was browsing, I heard the stall owner talking with a strange American-like accent. He said he was from Alabama. I'm from Georgia, and whatever he had was not a southern accent. I'm 90% sure he was faking an American accent to match his fake hats. You know, I actually caught someone faking a southern accent once. It was so weird. We had a waitress in northern Ohio, and my friend jokingly said, "I love your accent," as she sounded like a 60-year-old lady straight from the Delta. I'm from Tennessee and have been all around these parts, and nobody talks like that, at least not if they aren't a senior citizen from Mississippi or something. She tried to say she was from East Tennessee, exactly where we are from oddly enough, and once we asked her what part, and she was so vague, and all she was finally like, "Fine, I'm faking it because I get better tips this way." We had a good laugh and left her nice tip too. It was just so strange. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.